The night Juniper first heard the dragon breathe, the fire went out all at once. Not flickered, not dimmed. It stopped, as if the hearth itself had inhaled sharply and forgotten how to exhale. Juniper, who had been precisely 3/4 asleep on the braided rug, opened one amber eye. Silence pressed against the cottage walls, thick as snowfall. Outside, winter leaned its full weight against the windows. Frost stitched white vines along the glass, and the moon hung low and buttery, caught in the bare branches of the pear tree like a promise someone had forgotten to keep. Juniper rose. She was not a large cat, but she was a deliberate one. Her paws made no sound as she crossed the kitchen, tail lifted just enough to show she was alert, not afraid. The kettle on the iron hook was still warm. The loaf of bread on the counter exhaled yeast and comfort. Dried oranges and rosemary swayed faintly from the ceiling beam, though no wind stirred. Then came the sound again. A breath. Deep, resonant, gentle. It came from under the cottage. Juniper sat and listened, whiskers trembling. The old stories, the ones humans muttered to themselves while mending socks or stirring soup too slowly, drifted through her mind like half-remembered dreams. Dragons beneath hills, dragons beneath hearthstones, dragons beneath places where people felt safe enough to sleep. The hearthstone shifted. Just a little. Snow slid from the roof in a soft rush. The fire sprang back to life without spark or flint, flames curling blue-green at their edges, as if they had borrowed color from something alive. Juniper did not run. Instead, she hopped onto the hearth and peered down as the stone lifted like a polite door. Two eyes opened in the darkness below, faceted, bright, and shimmering with impossible color. Turquoise bled into coral. Lavender flashed into gold. Each scale caught the firelight differently, like wet seashells scattered across a tide pool. The dragon blinked. "Oh," it said, in a voice like wind moving through snow-dusted reeds. "Hello." Juniper sat back on her haunches and flicked her tail once. The dragon's snout emerged slowly, careful not to scrape the stone. Steam rose from its nostrils, warm and faintly scented of salt and rain. Its scales, layered, smooth, iridescent, shifted as it moved, changing color with every breath, just like the nimble spray crabs Juniper had once watched from a cliffside, their shells flashing blues and pinks as waves chased them. "I didn't mean to wake you," the dragon said. "The cold gets into my joints if I don't come up near the fire." Juniper considered this. She considered the fact that the dragon was small, as dragons go, no bigger than a large dog, tail curled neatly behind it. She considered the careful way it kept its claws tucked in. She considered that it had asked, in its own way, permission. She stepped forward and sniffed its nose. The dragon froze. Juniper sneezed, once decisively. "Ah," the dragon said, visibly relaxing. "That's a yes, then." The hearthstone settled back into place behind it, sealing the cottage floor as neatly as a quilt tucked in for the night. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, deliberate flakes, each one certain of its destination. The dragon folded its wings, which shimmered like frost-bitten petals, and curled itself beside the fire. Its name, it explained, was Nimbroscale, because it had been born in a storm cloud and never quite lost the habit of changing colors with the weather. Juniper leapt onto the dragon's warm back without asking. Nimbroscale gasped, then laughed, a low, crackling sound that made the kettle hum. "Oh," it said, "you're that sort of cat." Juniper kneaded once, twice, until she found a scale that held heat just right. Outside, the wind howled, thwarted by stone walls and rosemary charms. Inside, the fire settled into a steady glow, casting shadows that danced like old friends who knew all the steps. They spent the night like that, the cat and the dragon, listening to the cottage breathe. Nimbroscale told quiet stories about the clouds it had lived in, about rain that tasted like pears and lightning that hummed lullabies. Juniper purred and pretended not to listen, though her tail twitched at all the good parts. When dawn crept in, pale and shy, Nimbroscale slipped back beneath the hearthstone, promising to return when the snow grew heavy again. And it did. Winter deepened. The cottage became a pocket of warmth stitched into the white hills. Each night, Nimbroscale returned, scales flashing sea-glass colors in the firelight, bringing with it the scent of storms and faraway places. Each night, Juniper waited. Soon, the humans began to notice strange things. Bread stayed warm longer. The fire never went out. Icicles formed in careful spirals along the eaves, chiming softly when the wind passed through them. And sometimes, only sometimes, if you listened very closely, you could hear a cat purring in harmony with something much older, much larger and very determined to be gentle. But one evening, as the snow fell heavier than it ever had before, Juniper sensed something different in Nimbroscale's breath. It was faster, uneven, and when the hearthstone lifted, Nimbroscale did not speak at once. Juniper knew something was wrong before she saw it. She felt it in the way the fire leaned instead of danced, its flames bending as if listening for bad news. She felt it in the air, which had grown tight and metallic, like the moment before sleep begins. Most of all, she felt it in herself, an itch beneath her fur, a warning passed down through generations of cats who had lived alongside mysteries and learned when to sit still and when to stay. The hearthstone lifted. Nimbroscale emerged slowly, scales dimmer than usual, their sea-glass brilliance clouded as if frost had crept beneath them. The colors still shifted, but sluggishly now, turquoise bruising into gray, coral paling to winter shell white. Juniper stood. She did not meow. This was not a moment for noise. Nimbroscale exhaled and the breath fogged thickly, spilling across the floor like low tide. "I hoped," the dragon said softly, "that I was mistaken." Juniper hopped down from the chair and padded closer, placing herself squarely in front of the dragon's nose. She looked up, unblinking. "Well," Nimbroscale said after a moment, attempting a smile that did not quite hold, "that is either very brave or very foolish." Juniper flicked an ear. "The storm," Nimbroscale continued, curling its tail around its own feet, "is not behaving as it should." Outside, the wind rose in answer, worrying the shutters, rattling the dried herbs until rosemary and orange peel whispered against one another like anxious neighbors. Juniper glanced toward the door. Snow pressed against it already, higher than it had been an hour before. The world beyond the cottage had gone strangely dim, the moon blurred behind thickening cloud. The pear tree bent low, branches creaking under a sudden, heavy weight. Nimbroscale followed her gaze. "It's not just snow," the dragon said. "It's accumulating wrong, layering itself too quickly. Storms are meant to move. This one is lingering." Juniper sat and wrapped her tail neatly around her paws. This, too, was not the time for panic. The dragon lowered its head until it was nearly level with her. Its eyes, though dulled, still held flecks of brightness, tiny sparks of ocean blue and sunset pink. "I think," it said carefully, "that something is caught in the clouds." Juniper's whiskers twitched. "Not a creature," Nimbroscale added quickly. "Nothing that means harm, more like a knot, a memory perhaps. Old weather sometimes forgets how to let go." Juniper understood memory. She understood old things that stayed too long in one place. She had known a chair that still remembered a grandmother who no longer sat in it. She had known a window that held the shape of a face long after it had stopped appearing. She rose and walked to the hearth, placing one paw upon the warm stone. Nimbroscale watched her, something like wonder softening its worry. "You think I should go back up there?" Juniper did not look at the dragon. She pressed her paw more firmly into the stone, feeling the deep, familiar warmth beneath, the dragon's warmth, the earth's warmth, the slow patience of things that endure. Nimbroscale sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." The dragon hesitated, then reached out with one careful claw and nudged a loose ember back into the fire. The flames brightened at once, flaring with a brief return of vivid color. "If I leave the hearth unattended for too long," it said, "the cold may creep into the bones of the house." Juniper turned and fixed the dragon with a look that had, on more than one occasion, convinced humans to wake from sleep and tend a fire they hadn't realized was dying. Nimbroscale smiled properly this time. "Right," it said, "of course you'll watch it." The dragon moved toward the hearthstone, then paused. Slowly, almost shyly, it lowered its head until its brow touched Juniper's forehead, a careful, gentle press. Juniper purred, low and steady, lending what warmth she could. The hearthstone opened and Nimbroscale slipped beneath, its colors briefly brightening as it descended, like sunlight catching a wave at just the right angle. The stone closed again, seamless and quiet. For a long moment, the cottage held its breath. Juniper climbed onto the hearth and curled herself into a compact, watchful coil. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm thickened, snow falling faster now, flakes clumping together, blotting out familiar shapes. Time passed. Juniper did not move. She watched the fire the way only cats can, seeing not just flame but intention. When it leaned too far left, she adjusted the log with a careful paw. When a draft whispered down the chimney, she flicked an ear and the rosemary charm chimed softly, settling the air again. Still the cold pressed closer. The windows frosted completely over, intricate patterns blooming across the glass like white ferns. The kettle cooled despite being full. The bread stiffened. Even the shadows grew sharper as if edged with ice. Then very faintly, Juniper heard it. Thunder. Not loud, not frightening, but tired. The hearthstone trembled. Juniper stood at once. It lifted, slower than before, and Nimbroscale emerged once more, but now its scales had changed. The colors were deeper, darker, threaded through with silver veins like moonlit cracks in ice. Frost clung to the edges of its wings. "I found it," the dragon said, voice strained but steady. "The knot." Juniper stepped closer, sniffing carefully. The scent was sharp now, ozone and old snow, and something that reminded her of forgotten lullabies. "It's tangled in a story," Nimbroscale continued. "A storm that was never allowed to finish. Someone long ago wished it would stay." Juniper thought of the cottage, of the careful hands that had built it, of winters survived and winters endured, of wishes made quietly, desperately, by those who feared endings more than cold. Outside, the wind howled, not in anger but in confusion. Nimbroscale sank down beside the hearth, clearly exhausted. "I may need help," it admitted. Juniper did not hesitate. She placed one paw on the dragon's chest, right over where the warmth still pulsed, and began to purr, slowly at first, then deeper, drawing the sound from somewhere older than comfort alone. The fire responded, flaring brighter, casting gold across frost and stone. The cottage creaked, not in protest but in recognition. And somewhere high above, tangled in cloud and memory, the storm shifted. The purr spread. It slipped beneath floorboards and up through the chimney. It threaded itself into the rafters and curled around the hanging herbs. It seeped through the mortar between stones and out into the night, where the storm waited, confused, aching, held in place by a wish that had never been unknotted. Nimbroscale closed its eyes. Juniper's paw rested over the dragon's heart, small and sure. Her purr did not hurry. It did not demand. It simply was, steady as breath, warm as a lap beside a winter fire. "I remember now," Nimbroscale murmured. "This place, this hill, I flew over it once long ago." Outside, the wind faltered. Snow that had been falling in thick, desperate clumps slowed, flakes separating again into individual, delicate shapes. The air shifted, releasing a sound like a held sob. "The wish wasn't cruel," Nimbroscale continued, voice distant, threaded with memory. "Just lonely. Someone asked winter to stay because they didn't want to be alone when it left." Juniper's purr deepened. She understood loneliness the way cats do, not as absence, but as a space that waits to be filled. The dragon's scales brightened slightly, color stirring beneath the frost. Soft blues and pale corals resurfaced, as if warmth were gently knocking from the inside. "But storms," Nimbroscale said, "cannot keep promises they were never meant to make." The hearthstone glowed faintly now, runes long worn smooth by time stirring beneath its surface. The fire grew quieter, not smaller, but calmer, flames standing tall and golden instead of snapping. Juniper felt something pull, not at her body but at her attention. The cottage. It was listening. The walls creaked softly, settling deeper into themselves. The table leg that always wobbled stilled. The doorframe, warped from decades of winters, sighed and eased its tension. Even the kettle, long cooled, hummed faintly as if remembering warmth. Nimbroscale opened one eye. "You feel it too." Juniper flicked her tail once. "Yes," the dragon said, smiling faintly. "You always do." Carefully, slowly, Nimbroscale stood. Frost slid from its wings in glittering fragments that melted before they reached the floor. The dragon moved to the center of the room, scales now reflecting the fire in rippling, tide-pool colors. "The knot needs to be shown an ending," Nimbroscale said. "Not forced, just remembered correctly." Juniper hopped down from the hearth and followed, her paws making soft, purposeful sounds on the stone floor. Nimbroscale lowered its head, bringing one luminous eye level with her. "Will you come with me?" Juniper did not answer. She jumped. Light bloomed. The cottage seemed to stretch, not breaking, not bending, but opening, like a well-loved book unfolding to a familiar page. The ceiling lifted into cloud. The walls thinned into mist. Snowflakes hung suspended in the air, each one a tiny, perfect star. Juniper found herself standing on something solid yet soft, like packed snow warmed by sunlight. The fire's glow followed them, forming a small, steady sun at their backs. Ahead, the storm waited. It was not a monster. It was not even large. It was a tangle of wind and memory, wrapped tight around a shape that might once have been a voice. Snow spiraled in anxious loops. Thunder muttered to itself, unsure when it was allowed to speak. Nimbroscale stepped forward, scales gleaming like wet shells under moonlight. "Hello," the dragon said gently. The storm shuddered. Juniper walked beside the dragon, tail held high. She sat, then lay down, curling her body neatly against the cold. Her purr began again, not loud, not commanding, but present. Images stirred within the storm. A small cottage, newly built, hands raw from stone and timber, a single lamp burning late into the night, a figure standing in snow, whispering a wish to the sky because there was no one left to whisper it to inside. The storm tightened. Nimbroscale raised one claw, letting the colors along its scales shift, blue to pink to gold, like sunlight playing across shallow water. "You did your job," the dragon said to the storm. "You stayed. You kept the cold out long enough for the walls to remember warmth." Juniper's purr wove through the words, softening them. "But now," Nimbroscale continued, "the house is no longer alone." The storm trembled. Below them the cottage glowed brighter, a pocket of warmth stitched into the white hills. The fire burned steady. The hearthstone pulsed with patient heat. A cat waited and watched and stayed. The knot loosened. Wind uncurled itself, stretching long and slow. Snow lifted, then fell again, lighter this time, flakes drifting apart instead of clinging. The storm exhaled. Juniper lifted her head. Something was changing. The sky brightened at its edges, not with dawn but with movement. Clouds began to slide past one another, remembering how to travel. The storm's voice softened, its purpose easing back into flow. Nimbroscale staggered slightly, wings dipping. Juniper sprang to her feet at once, pressing close, her side warm against the dragon's leg. The dragon laughed softly and steadied itself. "Almost," Nimbroscale said, "just a little longer." The storm shifted again, and then unexpectedly tightened once more. Not around the knot. Around something else. Juniper's ears flattened. Below them the cottage flickered, not dimming but reaching. The hearthstone flared brighter than it ever had before. Nimbroscale frowned. "That's not right." The wind changed direction. And somewhere deep within the storm, something old stirred, something that had been quiet for a very long time, and was only now realizing it had been forgotten. The stirring did not announce itself with thunder. It came instead as a hush, a sudden, uncanny stillness where even the wind seemed to hesitate, as though unsure it was allowed to continue. Snowflakes froze mid-fall, hanging in the air like scattered stars caught in a held breath. Juniper felt it ripple through her whiskers. This was not the storm's doing. Nimbroscale straightened, wings lifting slightly, every scale along its body shifting toward deeper hues, indigo darkening to bruise purple, coral retreating beneath a sheen like moonlit slate. "That," the dragon said quietly, "is not weather." Juniper's tail puffed just a little. The space within the storm widened, unfolding like fabric drawn back from something hidden beneath. What emerged was not solid, not exactly, but it had shape, a long, slow curvature like the memory of a spine. Pale light traced its outline, faint as frost under starlight. The thing did not move forward. It remembered itself into being. "Oh," Nimbroscale breathed, "oh no." Juniper looked up sharply. "An ember echo," the dragon said, voice tight with recognition. "Left behind when a hearth burns for generations. Most fade. This one stayed." Below them the cottage shuddered, not in fear but strain. The hearthstone flared, warmth surging upward in a visible wave. The fire roared higher, flames turning nearly white at their core. Juniper yowled once, sharp and commanding. "I know," Nimbroscale said, lowering its head. "I know it's drawing too much." The echo stirred, pale light poolsing brighter, feeding on the remembered warmth of winters past. It had no malice. It had no hunger in the way creatures do. It only clung, to hands held near flames, to soup simmering while snow piled high, to the belief that warmth could be hoarded against loss. Juniper felt the ache of it in her chest. She took a step forward. Nimbroscale moved with her, matching pace, staying close enough that Juniper could feel the dragon's heat through the cold air. "Careful," the dragon murmured. "It doesn't know it's hurting anything." Juniper stopped just short of the echo's glow. She sat. Slowly, deliberately, she began to groom one paw lick, smooth, repeat utterly unafraid. The echo flickered. Confused. Juniper finished grooming and looked up. She did not purr this time. Instead, she did something rarer. She waited. Cats are very good at waiting. They wait for doors to open, for mice to make mistakes, for humans to realize what they need. Juniper waited with her whole body, a quiet invitation rather than a command. The echo leaned closer. Images spilled from it like breath on cold glass. A kettle always warm, a fire never dying, a house that would never be empty. Nimbroscale swallowed. "It thinks if it holds enough heat," the dragon said, "nothing will ever leave again." Juniper's ears tilted back, then forward. She rose and walked, not toward the echo, but toward the edge of the storm, toward movement, toward the place where clouds were beginning to remember how to drift. She sat again and curled her tail around her feet. Warmth did not disappear. It followed her. The fire's glow stretched, thinning but not breaking. The hearthstone's pulse steadied, no longer flaring, no longer straining. The echo wavered. Juniper looked back at it and flicked her tail once, a simple gesture, ancient and clear. "Come if you want, stay if you must, but don't clutch." The echo shuddered. Nimbroscale stepped forward now, scales brightening into soft tide pool colors once more. "You don't have to guard it anymore," the dragon said gently. "The house has learned how to hold warmth on its own." Below them, the cottage breathed. The table held steady. The walls remembered hands and laughter and quiet evenings without fear. The fire burned, not endless but enough. The echo dimmed, light thinning like mist under sun. But just as it began to loosen, the storm lurched. A sudden pull yanked at the clouds, twisting them sideways. Wind rushed back in too fast, snow whipping into sharp, stinging spirals. Nimbroscale staggered. Something's interfering. Juniper dug her claws into the snow cloud beneath her paws. Far away, beyond the hills, a new current surged, cold and sharp, unfamiliar. Not old memory, but new force. Winter arriving where it had not been invited. The echo flared again in alarm. The cottage flickered. Juniper's heart thudded once hard. This was no longer only about the past. Nimbroscale spread its wings fully now, colors flashing bright and storm-deep. "Juniper," the dragon said, urgency threading its voice, "we may not have much time." The wind howled, louder now, carrying with it a promise of colder nights yet to come. And somewhere beyond the storm's edge, something vast and restless turned its attention toward the small, glowing warmth of the cottage on the hill. The attention felt like pressure. Not weight, exactly, more like the sense of being noticed when you thought you were alone. Juniper felt it along her spine, a prickle that raised her fur despite the warmth still humming through the cloud beneath her paws. She did not retreat. Instead, she sat more firmly, tail wrapped tight, anchoring herself the way cats do when the world tilts unexpectedly. Nimbroscale hovered just behind her now, wings extended, each membrane shimmering with storm color, deep blues threaded with flashes of pearlescent pink and silver, like moonlight striking wet stone. The dragon's breath steamed visibly, each exhale measured. "That current," Nimbroscale said, voice low, "is not bound to this place." The wind answered, slicing sideways through the clouds, scattering snow into sharp arcs. The half-freed storm recoiled, confused again, its newly remembered movement disrupted by this colder will. Juniper's ears flattened. Below them the cottage shuddered, not violently, but insistently, as though something were knocking from the outside. The hearthstone pulsed, light traveling through it in slow, concentric rings. The fire guttered, then steadied as if bracing itself. Nimbroscale glanced downward. "It's reaching," the dragon said. "The house." Juniper knew. She felt the tug, not fear but need. The kind that does not beg, only opens its hands and hopes someone notices. Juniper stood and took one careful step toward the cottage's glow. The warmth followed her again, obedient and trusting. The echo, dimmed but not gone, hovered uncertainly between storm and shelter. Then the new cold arrived. It did not announce itself with sound. It arrived as absence. The air ahead of them thinned, color draining away until even moonlight seemed hesitant to cross it. Snow entering that space did not fall, it fractured, crystals snapping apart into powder. Nimbroscale hissed softly, "Deep frost." Juniper had no name for it, but she understood the feeling. This was the cold that crept into bones and forgot how to leave. The cold that did not mean harm, yet never learned mercy. The storm recoiled again, folding in on itself. Clouds bunched, winds tangled. The half-loosened knot tightened reflexively, not from desire but from fear. Juniper turned sharply and fixed the echo with a stare. The echo flared brighter in response, too bright, defensive, panicked. "No," Nimbroscale said firmly, "not like that." The dragon moved forward, placing itself between Juniper and the encroaching frost. Its scales flashed brilliantly now, colors rippling faster, brighter, reflecting firelight that did not yet exist in the cold ahead. "I will not let you burn the house hollow," Nimbroscale told the echo, "and I will not let the cold take it either." Juniper slipped beneath the dragon's wing, pressing close. The membrane radiated warmth, steady and alive. She began to purr again. Not loud. Focused. The sound did not spread outward this time. It sank downward, threading into the glow below, into hearthstone and timber and memory. The cottage answered, not with light but with structure. Beams held. Stones remembered where they belonged. The fire burned clean and true. The deep frost advanced another inch. Juniper felt the ache of it reach for her whiskers. Or she hissed. It was a small sound, but it was exact. The frost hesitated. Nimbroscale blinked. "You can feel it too," the dragon said softly. "It's listening." Juniper took a step forward, just one, and sat again, squarely facing the void of cold. She tucked her paws beneath herself, conserving heat, posture calm but unyielding. She did not challenge. She occupied. Warmth did not rush to fill the space. It stayed with her, contained, patient. The frost pressed closer and stopped. Something vast shifted beyond it, a sense of surprise rippling through the cold current. It had expected resistance or collapse. It had not expected stillness. The storm quivered, caught between forces. The echo flickered, light thinning further, as if realizing at last that holding tighter would only break what it loved. Nimbroscale lowered its wings slightly, relief flickering across its expression. "Good," the dragon murmured. "That's it. Let it see." Juniper's purr changed. It slowed. Deepened. It sounded like snow settling on a roof that knows how to bear weight. The deep frost retreated, just a fraction, but enough for the storm to breathe again. Clouds stretched. Wind loosened its grip. Then faintly, another sensation brushed Juniper's awareness. Movement. Not cold. Not storm. Something approaching from below. The hearthstone flared suddenly, brighter than before, and Juniper startled despite herself. Nimbroscale's head snapped around. That's not the echo. The cottage's glow surged upward in a narrow beam, piercing cloud and storm alike. Within it, shapes flickered, hands, shadows, footsteps remembered and remembered again. Juniper felt her chest tighten. Whatever was responding now was not weather, and not memory alone. It was something awakened by the balance they were trying to restore. The storm trembled. The frost paused. The echo dimmed to a fragile glow. And from the heart of the cottage's warmth, something began, slowly, carefully, to rise. The rising was not sudden. It unfolded the way heat does when you hold your hands over a fire for a long time, gradually, almost imperceptibly, until you realize warmth has seeped into places you didn't know were cold. The beam from the hearth widened, its edges soft, not blinding. Within it, shapes layered themselves carefully, like a story remembering how to be told in the right order. Juniper felt it before she understood it. A presence that did not press or pull, a presence that recognized her. Her purr faltered for half a heartbeat, then resumed, steadier than before. Nimbroscale stepped closer to the beam, eyes wide, voice hushed. That's remarkable. The warmth carried memory, yes, but also choice. Not the clinging ache of the echo, not the relentless reach of the frost. This was something that had been shaped by years of tending fires, of closing shutters against snow, of learning when to let embers fade and when to coax them back to life. A keeper. Not a person, not anymore. The shape within the glow resolved into something gentle and indistinct. The suggestion of hands that knew how to hold a kettle without spilling, shoulders bent not by burden but by habit, a silhouette made of lamplight and patience. The storm quieted. Wind slowed until it brushed instead of tore. Snow resumed falling properly, flakes drifting with purpose instead of panic. The deep frost recoiled another careful step, not defeated but reconsidering. Juniper rose and padded forward, her paws sinking slightly into the warmth spilling outward. She did not look back at Nimbroscale. This was something she had to greet herself. The keeper's shape tilted, as though noticing her in return. Juniper sat. She lifted one paw and placed it down again, exactly where the warmth was strongest. The keeper's glow brightened, not flaring, just clarifying. The suggestion of a smile passed through it, though there was no mouth to smile with. The hearthstone below pulsed once, slow and satisfied. Nimbroscale exhaled a long, awed breath. It learned, the dragon said. The house learned how to keep itself. Juniper's tail flicked. The echo, hovering nearby, dimmed further, its light thinning into something almost transparent. It no longer strained toward the cottage. It watched instead, uncertain, relieved, a little lost. The keeper turned, not with motion but attention toward it. Warmth flowed outward, not concentrated, not hoarded, offered. The echo wavered, then softened, its edges dissolving into a faint shimmer that folded gently into the keeper's glow. No struggle, no erasure, just release. The storm sighed. Clouds slid free of one another at last, untangling with visible relief. Wind found its path and followed it onward, no longer trapped in loops of old wishes. Above them the sky lightened, not with morning but with space. Juniper felt the tension ease along her spine. Then the deep frost shifted again. Not forward. Sideways. Testing. Nimbroscale stiffened. "It won't leave entirely," the dragon said. "Not yet, it never does, but it's no longer welcome here." The keeper's glow held steady, neither expanding nor shrinking. Juniper glanced back at Nimbroscale, then at the retreating frost. She walked to the edge of the warmth and sat, her body a small, deliberate boundary. The frost paused. Juniper yawned. It was an enormous yawn, jaw stretching wide, tongue curling, a gesture of profound, almost insulting calm. The frost withdrew another inch. Nimbroscale laughed softly, a sound like distant rain. "I should remember that trick." The beam of warmth began to narrow now, not fading but settling back toward the cottage below. The keeper's shape thinned, light folding inward like embers banked for the night. Before it fully withdrew, the glow brushed Juniper once, an unmistakable touch, warm and grateful. Juniper blinked slowly. Then the beam vanished. The clouds drifted apart completely. Snow fell lightly, properly, the way it was meant to. The storm, now free, began to move on, carrying its thunder and wind toward other hills, other stories. The deep frost lingered at a distance, watching but no longer reaching. Nimbroscale folded its wings, scales settling into softer hues, seafoam blues, pale corals, glints of gold like sunrise on wet sand. The dragon looked tired but peaceful. "It will be all right now," Nimbroscale said. Juniper sat very still. She was watching the cottage below, where the fire burned steady and the hearthstone rested, warm and quiet, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. But Juniper knew better. Something had changed, not ended, not resolved completely, but aligned. A balance struck, delicate and alive. She flicked an ear. Nimbroscale followed her gaze and frowned slightly. "What is it?" the dragon asked. Juniper stood. She felt it again. Not cold, not storm. Movement. Closer this time. From the trees at the edge of the hill, where snow clung thickly to branches and shadows pooled deeper than they should. Juniper's tail lowered, slow and intent. Whatever was there was not part of the old stories. It was new. And it was very curious about the warmth that had just learned how to stand on its own. Juniper did not bristle. That was the first sign this was different. Her fur lay smooth along her spine, every hair exactly where it belonged. Fear makes a cat expand. Curiosity makes a cat narrow. Juniper's world sharpened to a fine point aimed straight toward the tree line. Nimbroscale felt it immediately. The dragon's posture changed, not aggressive, not defensive, but ready. Wings stayed folded, yet muscles gathered beneath iridescent scales like coiled ribbon. "I don't recognize it," Nimbroscale murmured. The trees did not move. Snow clung to their branches in thick, uneven layers, turning limbs into pale silhouettes against the dark. The wind had softened to a whisper, but the forest seemed to be holding its breath nonetheless. Juniper took one step forward. The warmth followed her, but thinner now, stretched just enough to remind her it could not go everywhere at once. The cottage glowed steadily below, content to stay where it was. Something shifted at the forest's edge. Not a shape stepping out, more like a decision being made. Juniper stopped. From between two birches, a pair of eyes opened. They were not bright, they did not glow. They reflected, catching the cottage's light faintly, the way snow reflects moonlight without claiming it. Nimbroscale inhaled sharply. "Ah." Juniper's ears angled back, just enough to ask a question. "Not a creature," the dragon said quietly, "not in the way we usually mean." The eyes blinked once slowly. Then a figure eased forward, as careful as someone stepping onto ice they are not yet sure will hold. It was tall but not imposing, wrapped in layers that might once have been wool, might once have been bark, might once have been something else entirely. Snow dusted its shoulders but did not melt there. Frost rimed its edges but did not bite. Where its face should have been, there was suggestion rather than detail, a contour shaped by shadow and breath. It stopped well short of the warmth. That, too, was important. Juniper sat. She did not break eye contact. The figure inclined its head, not a bow, not quite, more like acknowledgement. "I felt it," the figure said. Its voice was quiet, textured like boots on packed snow or branches shifting under weight, not unfriendly, not warm. Nimbroscale did not answer at once. Juniper flicked her tail. "Yes," the dragon said finally, "you would have." The figure's attention drifted briefly toward the cottage. "It changed," it said. "That place." Juniper's tail tip twitched. "It learned," Nimbroscale replied, "as places sometimes do." The figure was silent for a long moment. Snow slid from a branch behind it with a soft thump. The sound seemed loud in the stillness. "I do not interfere," the figure said at last. "That is not my way." Juniper believed it. "And yet," Nimbroscale said gently, "you are here." The figure's head tilted slightly. The warmth moved differently tonight. Juniper stood and walked forward, 3 steps only, then stopped again, careful not to cross the invisible line where the warmth thinned to nothing. She sat and began to wash her shoulder. The figure watched, something like confusion rippling through its stillness. Nimbroscale smiled faintly. She does that when she wants someone to calm down. Juniper paused her grooming, just long enough to cast the dragon a look. The figure considered this. Then slowly it sat as well, lowering itself into the snow in a mirror of Juniper's posture. "I remember when there was no house," the figure said, "only wind." Juniper's grooming resumed. "And I remember when there was no fire," it continued, "only waiting." The warmth from the cottage pulsed once, slow and steady. Nimbroscale spoke carefully. "You are not here to take it." "No," the figure said, "nor to stop it." Juniper looked up. The figure's attention returned to her. "But new warmth changes paths," it said. "Snow learns new places to fall. Frost learns new edges." Juniper stood again and took one deliberate step backward toward the cottage. The warmth thickened around her. The figure did not follow. Instead it watched, measuring perhaps or memorizing. "Balance," Nimbroscale said softly, "always renegotiated." The figure inclined its head once more. "Yes." For a moment no one moved. Then far off another wind stirred, not sharp, not deep, but fresh. A reminder that winter was not finished, only continuing. The figure rose smoothly to its feet. "I will watch," it said, "from a distance." Juniper blinked slowly, deliberately. The figure stepped back into the trees. The eyes vanished. Snow settled where it had stood, unmarked except for a faint hollow that quickly filled. Silence returned. Juniper exhaled. Nimbroscale let its wings droop slightly. "That," the dragon said, "could have gone very differently." Juniper flicked her tail and began walking toward the cottage, certain and unhurried. Nimbroscale followed. Below them the hearthstone waited, warm and quiet. The fire glowed low and steady. The cottage stood as it always had, but now perhaps with a little more confidence in its bones. Juniper paused at the threshold of warmth, glancing once more toward the darkened trees. She felt it again, not threat, not fear. Attention. Something was learning. And learning, Juniper knew, always meant more nights ahead, more watching, more warmth to guard, more stories that were not yet finished. Juniper crossed the threshold first. Warmth gathered around her paws as she stepped back into the cottage's glow, the kind of warmth that does not rush to greet you but settles in once it knows you intend to stay. The hearthstone hummed faintly underfoot, no longer flaring, no longer reaching, simply present. Nimbroscale followed more slowly. The dragon paused at the edge of the light, glancing once over its shoulder toward the trees, where snow now fell undisturbed, as if nothing had ever stood there watching. Only then did it fold its wings completely and step inside. The cottage reformed itself around them. Cloud thinned into ceiling. Wind softened into the sigh of timber. Snow became silence pressing gently against the walls. The fire adjusted its shape, flames lowering into a steady, companionable glow. Shadows took their familiar places again, tucking themselves neatly into corners. Juniper leapt onto the hearth and turned in a tight circle before sitting, tail curled neatly around her paws. Nimbroscale settled beside the fire with a sound like embers shifting. Its scales dulled into calmer colors, seafoam and pearl, the faint blush of coral under moonlight. Steam rose from its back as the last of the storm's chill released its grip. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the storm continued on its way. Snow fell lightly now, flakes drifting down as though each one had made peace with gravity. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured, not a warning, just a reminder that the sky was still vast and alive. Juniper closed her eyes halfway. The cottage breathed. Nimbroscale watched the fire, expression thoughtful. "You felt it," the dragon said at last. "That watcher in the trees." Juniper flicked one ear. "It wasn't here for the house," Nimbroscale continued. "Not really. It was here for change." Juniper opened one eye. "Yes," Nimbroscale said softly. "I thought so." The dragon shifted closer to the hearth, careful not to crowd Juniper. The stone radiated warmth that sank deep into scales and bone alike, easing a weariness Nimbroscale hadn't noticed until now. "Things like that," the dragon said, "notice when patterns shift, when places stop behaving the way they used to." Juniper stretched one foreleg, claws extending and retracting once against the stone. The hearthstone answered with a faint pulse, content responsive. Nimbroscale smiled. "You taught it," the dragon said. Juniper's whiskers twitched. "The house," Nimbroscale clarified. "You showed it how to wait without clinging, how to hold warmth without fear." Juniper yawned. It was less dramatic than the one she had given the frost, but no less sincere. Nimbroscale laughed quietly. "Yes," the dragon said, "I suppose you would see it that way." The kettle, which had been forgotten entirely, chose that moment to give a small, hopeful ping. Juniper's head lifted at once. Nimbroscale raised a brow. "You want tea." Juniper hopped down from the hearth and padded toward the kettle, sitting pointedly beside it. "I can't drink it," Nimbroscale said, "though it rose anyway. But I can heat it." The dragon nudged the kettle back over the fire. Flames leaned in, brightening just enough. Soon, steam curled upward, carrying the faint, comforting scent of herbs that had been dried months ago and were only now remembering their purpose. As the water warmed, Juniper jumped onto the table and curled herself beside the loaf of bread, which had softened again in the restored warmth. She kneaded it absently, lost in thought. Outside, the wind brushed past the windows, curious but gentle. Snow gathered along the sill in soft, rounded drifts. Nimbroscale poured the hot water into a waiting cup, careful, precise. The liquid glowed faintly for a moment before settling into ordinary steam. "There will be consequences," the dragon said quietly, setting the cup down. "Not bad ones, just ripples." Juniper's tail tip flicked. "Yes," Nimbroscale agreed. "Others will notice, places nearby, old paths may shift, new ones may open." Juniper rested her chin on her paws. Nimbroscale glanced at her. "You're not worried?" Juniper purred. It was slow, deep, utterly unconcerned. The dragon watched her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," Nimbroscale said. "We'll meet them as they come." The fire settled lower. The kettle quieted. The cottage wrapped itself around the night like a shawl pulled close. Juniper's eyes drifted shut, though her ears remained tuned to the world beyond the walls. The trees, the snow, the watcher who had retreated but not forgotten. Sleep came softly, like snow at last learning where to land. But beneath the hearthstone, deep in the bones of the hill, something stirred, not awake, not restless, but aware. And far beyond the cottage's warm circle, winter continued to move, carrying news of a small house that had learned how to keep its own warmth, and of the cat and dragon who had taught it how. Juniper dreamed. It was not the sort of dream with edges or urgency. It drifted, loosely stitched together from warmth and sound and the remembered rhythm of Nimbroscale's breathing nearby. In it, the cottage was larger on the inside, its corners unfolding into places Juniper had never bothered to explore before. Quiet rooms full of sunlit dust, hearths that hummed even without fire, windows that opened not onto the hill, but onto other winters entirely. She dreamed of snow that did not fall, but listened. She dreamed of paws, hers, and others she did not recognize, leaving prints that glowed faintly before fading back into ordinary white. And beneath it all, a feeling, not danger, not alarm, but anticipation. Juniper's eyes opened. The fire had burned down to a low, steady bed of coals. The cottage lay wrapped in the deepest part of night, that soft blue-dark hour when even the wind seems reluctant to speak. Snow pressed quietly against the walls, insulating rather than intruding. Nimbroscale slept curled near the hearth, tail wrapped around its body, wings folded so neatly they looked like part of the dragon back rather than something meant to move. The dragon's scales glimmered faintly even in sleep, colors muted but alive, like tide pools under starlight. Juniper stretched. Every muscle extended, toes spreading, claws lightly brushing the hearthstone. Warmth answered immediately, gentle and familiar. The stone no longer flared in response. It did not need to. It trusted. Juniper hopped down and padded toward the window. She peered out through a small clear patch where frost had not yet claimed the glass. The hill lay smooth and pale beneath the moon. The pear tree stood still, branches bowed but unbroken. Beyond it the tree line waited, dark and quiet. Nothing moved. Juniper watched anyway. Cats understand that stillness is rarely empty. Behind her, Nimbroscale shifted, stirring from sleep. One eye opened, luminous even in the dim light. "You're awake," the dragon murmured. Juniper flicked an ear. Nimbroscale stretched carefully, joints popping softly like embers shifting in a fire. "I felt something," the dragon said. "Not wrong, just new." Juniper turned from the window and walked back toward the hearth, stopping beside Nimbroscale's head. She sat and wrapped her tail neatly around her paws. "Yes," Nimbroscale said after a moment, "that makes sense." The dragon lifted its head slightly, gaze drifting toward the ceiling as though it could see through timber and cloud alike. "The house is louder now," it said thoughtfully. "Not in sound, in presence." Juniper blinked slowly. "It's like," Nimbroscale continued, searching for the right words, when a place stops whispering and starts speaking in its own voice. Juniper hopped back onto the hearth and settled herself squarely at its center. The hearthstone pulsed once, slow in content. Nimbroscale smiled. Yes, exactly that. Outside, something shifted, not at the tree line this time, but closer. Snow slid from the roof in a soft rush, landing in a gentle heap beside the door. The sound carried no urgency, no warning. Still, Juniper's ears angled toward it. Nimbroscale followed her attention. You think someone heard? Juniper did not answer. She rose and padded toward the door, stopping just short of it. She sat, posture upright, listening. There it was again. Not footsteps. Wait. Something resting briefly against the world, testing how it felt. Nimbroscale stood, moving quietly despite its size. The dragon did not reach for the door, did not speak. It waited, respecting Juniper's lead. The cottage held steady. The warmth did not surge. The fire did not flare. Nothing inside reacted as though threatened. After a long moment, the pressure eased. Whatever had paused there moved on, leaving behind only a faint impression in the snow, already filling in, already fatting. Juniper relaxed. Nimbroscale exhaled. Another watcher, the dragon said softly, or perhaps just a traveler. Juniper turned and returned to the hearth. She curled herself into a tight, precise circle, tail tucked over her nose. Her purr began again, low and even, syncing with the cottage's quiet breath. Nimbroscale settled beside her, careful not to disturb her rhythm. The dragon closed its eyes, trusting the night to pass as nights usually do, one careful moment at a time. Outside, winter continued its slow work. Inside, warmth held. And beneath the hill, deeper than hearthstone and memory, something shifted once more, not waking, not rising, but turning slightly, as though adjusting itself in sleep. The turning beneath the hill was subtle. If Juniper had been fully asleep, she might have missed it. But cats rarely surrender entirely to rest, especially when the night is thick with listening. She felt it instead as a change in the rhythm of the world, a pause between heartbeats where something adjusted its weight, then settled again. Her purr never faltered. Nimbroscale stirred beside her, a faint ripple passing through its scales as color shifted unconsciously in sleep. The dragon dreamed, too. Juniper could tell by the way its breath hitched and smoothed, by the quiet hum that sometimes escaped its chest like distant thunder remembered fondly. The cottage absorbed it all. The walls did not creak this time. The beams did not sigh. They simply held, confident in their joints and stones. Even the snow pressing against the outer walls seemed to soften, packing itself more carefully, as if reluctant to intrude. Juniper dreamed again. This dream was deeper. She walked, not with pause exactly, but with awareness through the hill beneath the cottage. Earth parted easily for her, soil warm and loamy, threaded with roots that pulsed faintly with remembered summers. She passed old stones smoothed by centuries of frost and thaw, each one humming softly, like a chorus holding a single patient note. Further down, warmth gathered. Not fire. Something older. Something that did not burn, but endured. Juniper paused. The presence beneath the hill did not rise. It did not reach. It waited, as Juniper had taught the storm to wait, as the cottage had learned to wait. You are awake, the presence seemed to say, not in words but in recognition. Juniper sat. In dreams, too, cats sit when they mean to stay. She flicked her tail once, slow and deliberate. The presence shifted again, not toward her but with her. an alignment rather than an approach. It felt vast, slow-moving, layered with seasons and snowfall and footsteps long since erased. Warmth has changed, it conveyed, cautiously curious. Juniper thought of the hearthstone, of the keeper's glow, of Nimbroscale's careful wings shielding her from frost. She purred. The sound traveled downward through dream soil and stone, winding gently through old passages and forgotten pockets of air. It reached the presence and wrapped around it, not constricting, not demanding, simply there. The presence settled. Satisfied perhaps, or at least reassured. Juniper woke. Morning had not yet arrived, but the dark had thinned. The fire was nearly spent now, coals glowing like scattered stars. Nimbroscale lay awake beside her, eyes open, watching the hearthstone with quiet focus. "You felt it too," the dragon murmured. Juniper blinked. "Yes," Nimbroscale said softly, "I thought so." The dragon shifted, careful not to disturb the coals. "It's old," Nimbroscale continued. "Older than me, older than storms perhaps, but it isn't restless." Juniper stretched one paw and rested it against the hearthstone. The warmth there was deeper now, not hotter but steadier, as if the hill itself had leaned closer to listen. "It's watching," Nimbroscale said, "learning the new shape of things." Outside, dawn finally began its slow, tentative approach. The sky lightened by degrees, pale blue brushing against the edges of night. Snow reflected it softly, turning the world luminous without glare. Juniper hopped down from the hearth and walked to the door again. She paused, listening. She flicked her tail once, slow and deliberate. The presence shifted again, not toward her but with her. An alignment rather than an approach. It felt vast, slow-moving, layered with seasons and snowfall and footsteps long since erased. Warmth has changed, it conveyed, cautiously curious. Juniper thought of the hearthstone, of the keeper's glow, of Nimbroscale's careful wings shielding her from frost. She purred. The sound traveled downward through dream soil and stone, winding gently through old passages and forgotten pockets of air. It reached the presence and wrapped around it, not constricting, not demanding, simply there. The presence settled. Satisfied perhaps, or at least reassured. Juniper woke. Morning had not yet arrived, but the dark had thinned. The fire was nearly spent now, coals glowing like scattered stars. Nimbroscale lay awake beside her, eyes open, watching the hearthstone with quiet focus. "You felt it too," the dragon murmured. Juniper blinked. "Yes," Nimbroscale said softly, "I thought so." The dragon shifted, careful not to disturb the coals. "It's old," Nimbroscale continued. "Older than me, older than storms perhaps, but it isn't restless." Juniper stretched one paw and rested it against the hearthstone. The warmth there was deeper now, not hotter but steadier, as if the hill itself had leaned closer to listen. "It's watching," Nimbroscale said, "learning the new shape of things." Outside, dawn finally began its slow, tentative approach. The sky lightened by degrees, pale blue brushing against the edges of night. Snow reflected it softly, turning the world luminous without glare. Juniper hopped down from the hearth and walked to the door again. She paused, listening. Nothing pressed against it this time. But beyond the hill, far enough that only the quietest senses would notice, paths were shifting. Winter carried news on its breath, not rumors, not warnings, but information. Of a place where warmth did not flee nor cling. Of a cat who sat at boundaries and did not yield. Of a dragon whose scales remembered the sea even in snow. Juniper sat by the door and waited. Nimbroscale watched her, expression thoughtful. "Whatever comes next," the dragon said quietly. "It won't be simple." Juniper flicked her tail. Simple, she knew, was overrated. The kettle began to warm again, coaxed by embers that refused to fully fade. The cottage stretched into the morning like a living thing greeting the day. Snow slid from the roof in soft avalanches, making room for more. And beneath the hill, the old presence turned just enough to face the future, still resting, still silent, but no longer asleep in quite the same way. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped. Light thinned the shadows by degrees, turning their edges soft, then translucent, then finally letting them slip back into the corners where they belonged. The frost on the windows loosened its grip, patterns melting into rivulets that traced slow paths downward, like the last lines of a story erasing themselves to make room for another. Juniper remained by the door. She had not moved for some time. Her posture was relaxed but precise, the way it only ever was when she had decided that vigilance and rest could coexist. One ear angled toward the hearth, where Nimbroscale sat quietly. The other tracked the world beyond the thick oak door, snow, trees, distance. Nimbroscale watched her with something like reverence. "You know," the dragon said after a while, voice low so as not to disturb the cottage's careful waking, "there are guardians who are chosen and guardians who choose." Juniper did not look back. "And then," Nimbroscale continued, "there are those who simply are." Juniper's tail tip twitched. The kettle clicked softly, signaling it was ready again. Steam curled upward, fragrant and gentle. The fire had dwindled to embers, but they glowed with quiet determination, no longer needing coaxing. Outside, a bird tested the morning with a single note. It paused, then tried again, adding a second. Juniper shifted her weight. Something had changed, not dramatically, not urgently, but unmistakably. The attention she had felt in the night had not vanished. It had distributed. No longer focused on the cottage alone, it had spread outward, thinning as it went, like warmth carried by wind. She stepped away from the door at last, crossed the room, leapt back onto the hearth. The hearthstone warmed instantly beneath her paws, but did not pulse. It did not ask. It simply acknowledged her presence and went on being what it was. Nimbroscale smiled. "You're satisfied," the dragon said. Juniper circled once and lay down, chin resting on her paws, her eyes half-lidded but not sleeping. "Yes," Nimbroscale agreed, "for now." The dragon rose and stretched, wings unfurling just enough to catch the morning light. Their membranes shimmered faintly, colors shifting with the angle, pale blue into shell pink into something like dawn reflected on water. The sight was brief. Nimbroscale folded them again with care. "I should check the hill," the dragon said. "Just the edges. Make sure nothing followed the warmth too closely." Juniper's eyes opened a fraction more. "I won't go far," Nimbroscale added quickly, "and I won't leave the hearth empty." Juniper considered this. Then she blinked once, slow, deliberate. Nimbroscale bowed its head slightly, accepting the permission for what it was. The dragon stepped toward the hearthstone, touched it lightly with one claw, and slipped down through it as easily as breath through lungs. The stone closed. Juniper was alone. She did not mind. The cottage continued its morning rituals without guidance. The table caught the light just so. The loaf of bread softened further, crust relaxing. The kettle's steam drifted lazily, no longer urgent. Juniper listened. Far away, the storm that had passed continued on its path, shedding snow over distant valleys. The deep frost lingered at the edges of the season, no closer than before, but no farther either. The watcher in the trees remained a watcher, content to observe and learn. Beneath it all, the old presence under the hill stayed still, but awake enough to notice when Juniper shifted her paws. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest them. And in that gentle, watchful pause, the world adjusted again, quietly, patiently, laying the first careful stones of whatever would come next. Evening came the way it always had, honestly. The light slanted low through the windows, turning the snow outside into a field of pale gold. Shadows stretched long and familiar across the cottage floor, settling into their places like old cats themselves. The day had done its quiet work and now, without ceremony, stepped aside. Juniper woke fully when the hearthstone warmed beneath her paws in a way that meant return, not movement. Nimbroscale rose from the stone as gently as steam from a cooling kettle. The dragon looked tired in the good way, wings loose, colors softened into calm tidepool hues, as if the sea itself had exhaled. A dusting of soil clung to one claw, and Juniper noted it with approval. "All clear," Nimbroscale said quietly. "Nothing pressing, nothing hungry, just a lot of watching." Juniper stretched, long and luxurious, spine arching, tail high. She hopped down from the hearth and pressed her forehead briefly against Nimbroscale's leg. The dragon smiled and rested a claw lightly against her back. "You did most of the work," Nimbroscale said. Juniper purred but did not accept full credit. Balance, after all, was never the work of one alone. The fire was coaxed back to life, not roaring, not bright, but companionable. The kettle warmed. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and deliberate, flakes drifting down as though each one knew exactly where it wished to land. They settled together by the hearth. Not guarding now, just being. The cottage held warmth without effort, as if it had always known how. Beneath it, the hill rested, old and steady, content to let smaller things tend the present while it remembered the past. Farther out, winter continued its long journey, carrying news but no urgency, no threat. And the watchers of frost, of forest, of storm kept their distance, not out of fear but respect. Juniper closed her eyes. Her purr rose and fell with the rhythm of the fire, the dragon's breathing, the quiet life of the cottage itself. It was not magic exactly. It was not protection spelled or promised. It was care. That was enough. Outside, the night deepened, and the stars turned slowly overhead, unconcerned and bright. Inside, warmth stayed, not because it was trapped, not because it was forced, but because it had been invited, and because it had learned it was welcome to remain only as long as it wished. Juniper slept. Nimbroscale kept watch without effort. And the cottage on the hill, stitched into winter with stone and fire and patience, lived on, quiet, whole and ready for whatever stories might one day knock at its door.